Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network. Welcome back to the show. The Honorable Dr. Grant Venerable joining us here today live. Just stepped away for a moment. Here he comes now into frame. We're excited to have him back, and he says he had a good Easter. What did you do for the holiday?
Golly geez, I spent the weekend at my church's conference, general conference, meets semi-annually. It was a beautiful moment. It was a call for peace, peace within and peace throughout the earth. It's just what I needed to hear, and some beautiful hymns played. But it was good. It's excellent. So today, did you want to put out a call to see who wanted to call in? Because I'm going to focus on my memoir, the book entitled. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
You were
Okay,
frozen
I
there
can
for a
hear you.
second. I'm like,
My big beautiful memoir called Footprints in the Chaotic Unknown. If that isn't where we are today, I don't know what is. But I wrote it long before we got to today. And my life experiences that enabled me to achieve, to survive, to get through some opportunities and as well as difficult moments. I'm gonna uh, start with what we call student evaluations of the course, because nowadays professors are required and have been required for years to give a computerized evaluation of their class to be picked up by a special monitor that keeps the pages confidential as they're taken to the main office. And I'm always amused by the questionnaire that's used on there because I had no input in making it. So what do? I have my own evaluation, which I do separate, and I put it as the last question of my final examination to the chemistry class or the cultural studies class, whatever I'm teaching. And one of the questions on it, the first question is, what did you like best about this class? And the second question is always, what did you like least about this class? And the third question was, any comments? And so it was like an open invitation to put whatever is on their minds. Uh, but yet the universities all over the country still persist in this computer evaluation, which is a multiple choice response, which I also abhor because it cannot anticipate what students are really feeling. So students do the best they can. One of the questions was this class well organized? And I always chafe at that question because my classes are not what the conventional mind would call well organized. In other words, I do not lecture, I do not present in a nice logical order or a chronological order. I present as the topics come to me based upon what the students indicate they're interested in. Um, so why am I bringing that up now? Because even though I've done podcasting for quite a long time now, I just realized this morning that where I want to go first is going to seem out of order and not very well organized, because that's the way life occurs to everybody. It occurs spontaneously and largely unpredictably. So I want to start, of all things, with what's being called conspiracy thinking, because conspiracy thinking has dominated the news more and more, particularly in last, few years, particularly around election time. And the conspiracy thinking is when politicians these days, at least, they don't seem to be well planned unless they got a good conspiracy stimulated thought out there to draw everybody in. What they're really doing, those that do that, are taking a page out of guidance they get from uh, public relations offices that they hired to manage their campaigns to win, not necessarily to do the greatest good for society, but to win at almost any cost. So I wanted to mention some of the buzzwords of that so that certainly our listeners, I'm sure many of them are aware that when they hear buzzwords like they, they do this, they do that, they do this constantly, and they never define they. They never define who the they is. So when things are ill-defined, you can bet that you're being brought in, taken in by what's called conspiracy thinking, because they're trying to create in your mind an idea that there are powerful others, external agencies, external to yourself, that actually control your life and mean to control it forever and ever. Now, I'm not going to mention any particular parties. I'm just going to mention the buzzwords so that everyone will know where I'm coming from when they hear those words used in the news media. The word erased is used a lot. Erasing this or that, particularly erasing one's history. And in some instances, it refers to erasing a whole group or class of people. And so it kind of gets a nice ambiguous either either or, an us versus them kind of mindset going. And that's an easy mindset to take over for anyone that's vulnerable to that. And they buy into it, they fall into it. Um, but psychology is what is being utilized, particularly humanist psychology, can be used five different ways. Uh, a good way is to help you live your life better and overcome problems and obstacles. Another way is to use it to manipulate people with it. And it does very well at that for the vulnerable. So now that I've covered they, there's a few other words. Let me call these up here. These words are addressed to large population groups that people imagine exist. They come from what we call demographic uh, accounts of who lives in American society to try to appeal to those people. Another one we've heard used lately, I've heard, is bloodlines, and how bloodlines of families control the people in that particular country. And there have been controlling families. We can think of any number of families in the United States, some more honorable than other families, but the mafioso bloodlines are certainly an example of that
Yep.
on the negative side. We've heard the term deep state. That's supposed to be an imaginary something that somehow has never been discovered, but is there waiting to control us, control our lives,
Mm-hmm.
make our lives even miserable for us, to make us vote for people that say they can make their lives less miserable or even better. Um, we see that a lot. I saw a recent feature online about some of our popular entertainers and musicians and how they get hooked in to these bloodlines and corporations, and they discover, okay, they're doing well with music and they've been discovered by a great company that markets them to the consuming public, and that the goal is to make money for the companies, and sometimes the performers get a little bit of scratch out of that, and some get a lot of scratch, like they can earn millions of dollars. The key for them is, are they taking care of it? Are they working with good money managers that when the business runs out, they can still maintain their lifestyle? Which is what I've managed to do, just as a professor or an administrator of university. In my first one of my administrative positions, which pay more salary than teaching positions, um, I went to buy a house in the area. And there were houses that I could afford that were more
Mm-hmm.
expensive than what I had purchased before on a professor's salary. And in my own wisdom, learned just by surviving over the years, I opted for a house that could still be sustained and the mortgage payments paid easily within my range as a teacher. So when I moved to Atlanta to work for a college, I said, well, it'd be nice to live in this house by this lake and or over here it's more expensive, but I opted for a house that if I didn't have that job all of a sudden, which is easy if you're an administrator, and I had to settle for a teacher's salary, I could still afford it. And that's how I found my very nice house south of Atlanta, Georgia, that was only 25 miles from the college that I was the dean of faculty for. Well, with that little introduction, I want to go into a little more of what my book is about. Did you announce the phone number, Jill?
No, I did not. Six
Let's
three one
let's do
three zero
that at the
seven
start.
4010. 631-307-4010. Please feel free to call in at any moment. Go ahead, continue. Mm-hmm.
I want to go into a specific section of my volume 4 of my memoir. Um, Very interesting volume, particularly around the end of the final chapter, chapter 32 of my existence, which really, let's see if I can call it up on my screen here and still be online here. I think I can come up with it right here. Let me close all those. Yeah,
Oh, I'll mention it again. 631-307-4010.
okay. This is from the afterword of my whole book. It's the afterword to chapter 32 called
Mm-hmm.
The Next American Revolution. And uh, and I start with saying the entire world confronted an unprecedented challenge in the COVID-19 coronavirus pandemic. I choose my words carefully here so that I can go beyond the bounds of previously accepted thinking, orthodoxy, and practice. This is counseled by decades of living, which, surprising to me, have dramatically enhanced my vision. So, with polite restraint, I would assert that most of the explicit and especially the implicit agreements under which society is operated can now be called out, reevaluated, and corrected. The stakes are too high for the world to continue what I call sleepwalking and avoiding the critical uh, conversation on the sociocultural bottom line upon which everything else sits, namely, from my book subtitle, Art, Science, uh, kinship, politics, all of it, environment. Uh, Now, W.E.B. Du Bois, who's the great sociologist who was educated at Harvard University in the 1800s and wound up teaching at Atlanta University in the early 1900s, said his famous line: the problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line. But in the 21st century, I would add, the color line, like COVID-19, has mutated into new viral forms,
Mm-hmm.
forms intent on controlling the alien other in its home territory. And then I get into um, education has the ultimate responsibility to provide an enlightened ethos,
Mm-hmm.
an organizing principle, as well as wise mentors to the
Mm-hmm.
current, by no means eternal, innovative four. And by that I mean these corporate entities certainly hope to forestall their demise and replacement in the next American Revolution. And these would include Apple, Microsoft, IBM. Um, let's see, what's the other one I had? I'll get to, but everyone knows about them, and they're getting bigger, bigger, and richer and richer. Um, it may seem contradictory for me to admit to having enjoyed only a modestly fulfilling, if not an entirely fulfilling,
Mm-hmm.
vocational journey, including 15 years as executive level academic officer in 3 universities. But that is one factoid that this memoir is about: living into the illusion of unwelcome career disappointments, along with the reality of richly personal fulfillment as complementary flip sides of the double shadowed human experience. Such a contradiction it is, managing and optimizing chaotic uncertitude, and admitting that I'm a thoroughly seasoned teacher and leader, tempered by sometimes optimal, but in most cases, infinitely challenging life terrains. My career has enabled me to develop the expected benchmarks of scholarship, strategic planning, governance, and curriculum development, all of it. Yet, in spite of accomplishing these benchmarks, they should have counted for so very much more for the
Mm-hmm.
many institutions to which I applied and was denied a position, or the few from which I was discharged from employment, and for those that hired me and to which I gave my full measure of devotion, time, and energy. To my logical left brain, analytical self, my efforts should have counted for very much more for our nation and for myself as a talented individual of richly diverse heritage, education, and experience. But at the end of the day, when the emotional relational self speaks, redemption quietly enters the picture, and
Mm-hmm.
I humbly count my many blessings. What I'm getting to here is my father's
Oh.
history. Grant D. Venerable, the senior Grant D. Venerable, belongs to modern history's elite circle of first science and engineering graduates of African descent from the top science and engineering
Yes.
schools.
Mm-hmm.
And these schools include, among notable others, Rensselaer Polytechnic, that is Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, MIT, Iowa State, Tuskegee in Alabama, Georgia Tech, Cal Poly, and Caltech. Now, Dad's brilliant achievement at Caltech, where he got his BS in civil engineering, 1932, evidenced a self determination, strategic resourcefulness, and family ethos, and I'll add values that he successfully transmitted to his mentees and kindred spirits, his children and their progeny. Yet it was paradoxical since in Southern California of the 1920s to 1940s, eugenics and white nationalism were rising priorities of its corporate, political, and journalistic elite. My father encouraged his children to attend college. He applauded my undergraduate studies in chemistry at UCLA and PhD success in physical chemistry with a PhD at the University of Chicago. And while our parallel father son achievements were, of course, affected by the color line, both of us persevered, my dad and I, and neutralized barriers wherever possible. How that was done is vital for historians, policymakers, and today's younger generations to engage with and not simply sweep under the carpet. The younger generations now cry out for inspiration and guidance from role models who succeeded against unimaginable odds. At UCLA, in his first year of college teaching in 1961, and that was my first year taking chemistry, America's revered Egyptian born chemical physicist, Mustafa A. El Sayed. This writing, a professor emeritus at Georgia Tech,
Mm-hmm.
is widely respected and beloved by his former students of all ethnic origins, religions, and cultural backgrounds. Only 9 years my senior, he was my inspiring mentor and role model during my undergraduate chemical studies in the early 1960s. And this gets to what I call the great mystery, which is what religion primarily deals with. Also concerning have been my efforts to address key questions in higher education.
Mm-hmm.
Questions like how to redeem human societies in the vortex of crisis. But now our task is far beyond just preparing students for where we already were in normal 2018 to 2019 COVID pre pandemic times, beyond preparing them for a career or for healing a world appearing to fracture along socioeconomic and political fault lines. And I say politically, that is appearing to fracture, appearing, because it's all in how we frame what we're looking at and hearing about.
Mm-hmm.
Today's visionary leaders are actually already bringing to the table ideas that can bring about more effective educational and economic structures. Talent in problem solving remains a hoped for goal in academic, corporate, and civic life. But then a terrifying virus made interdisciplinary problem solving a mandate
Yeah.
from nature itself, or should I say, nature herself. The author views the infectious mutating coronavirus as a voice mandating the healing of the collective eyesight of humankind. And this is timely as the flaws in our vision stir up unseemly illusions like societal polarization, demonic hatreds, as in racism and anti Semitism, and conspiracy thinking and plain old paranoia.
Hmm.
And the author Me admits such a view runs contrary to the majority news media view, where management brains have gotten stuck in the brain's
Yeah.
beta frequency state and are unable to see or dare not admit to seeing any news event interpretations outside the verdict of their physical senses and fear based beliefs. Yet, the potential energy awaiting release from such a coronavirus mandate is sufficient to enable to society to liberate itself from mental and physical illness arising from the chaotic unknowns of fear and demon hatreds. But impatient creatures that we are, we shall have to learn
Yeah.
patience. And as we learn, the mandate for clear vision guides our footsteps to the great mystery itself,
Sure
the
is.
Alpha and Omega of art, science, oracles, and kindred spirits. And that's the title of the memoir. And then I get into a section on the advent of revolutions. Now I'm just going to take a breath for a moment as I shift gears. In the decade it has taken the author, that is me, to complete this memoir,
Mm-hmm.
Caltech, out in Pasadena, California, has quietly ushered in a new vision of itself as a
Yeah.
21st century social change agent, far surpassing its already established scientific and technological attainments.
Mm-hmm.
The next American Revolution has begun, not the least of which is Caltech's own enlightened repudiation of the stain of eugenic pseudoscience. This was a temporary diversion
Yep.
during the Institute's modern day second founding in the 1920s, with a eugenics oriented foundation that was established next to the Caltech campus in 1929. And it was in the same year that a young man propelled by a bold vision of his own future applied for admission to one of the greatest engines of scientific research and learning on this planet. Up to that time, no individual of his heritage had matriculated at or graduated from Caltech.
Wow.
But for everything, there is a season, even in the world of science and technology, and a time for every matter under the heaven. And in this young man's seeking, some
Mm-hmm.
thought him quite mad,
Yep.
or perhaps just misguided to imagine that a grandson of servants in Missouri servitude would not be subject to keenest scrutiny for the
No.
slightest misstep or failure, given the racial foibles of his day. But in Paul's letter to the Hebrews, chapter 11, verse 1, faith in the fullness of time brings the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Such a time came in the watch of
Mm-hmm.
Thomas Rosenbaum, the Institute's visionary ninth president, when the Board of Trustees recognized the needful timeliness of peace and healing in respect to our nation's difficult past. It arrived quietly in a
Mm-hmm.
far reaching decision to honor the academic and lifetime achievements of Caltech's first graduate of Black African descent. The board voted November 2021 to rename rather, one of the 8 undergraduate residence halls after this young
Wow.
applied mathematician and son of a bygone era.
Mm-hmm.
When one of the 60-year-old residence halls was renamed Grant D. Venerable House, when that happened, faith came full circle. And that brings me to some insights. And it's introduced by uh, uh, something from Alice's Looking Glass, a lens into social psychology, a comment on our new age of social complexity and the illusion of electoral uncertainty. So this is getting right to where we live today.
Mm-hmm.
While the majority of American adults probably rely on rational thought as a matter of course when coping with emotional or stressful experiences, Matthew Burke's thoughts on Alice in the Looking Glass uh, are politically, or rather, I should say, poetically instructive. The phrase, through the looking glass, as used in literature by world renowned author Lewis Carroll, can be viewed as a metaphor for any time the world suddenly appears unfamiliar,
Mm-hmm.
almost as if things were turned upside down, similar to looking out from inside the mirror to find a world both recognizable and yet inside out.
Mm-hmm.
This was
Ah.
especially noticeable when an iconic candidate recently lost the general election and with a perfectly straight face continued to repeat the same irrational soundbite mantra that a rigged or stolen election was the only possible reason for his loss. It may take neuroscience a few years to plumb the depths of neurochemistry in the human being to understand why this explanation got such traction and created acute problems for the candidate, his party, and the nation. But it may take even longer for science to explain dark
Mm-hmm.
matter or the neurochemical basis of hate, greed, paranoia, and those pesky phobias of racism, anti Semitism, sexism, and sexualism. That said, the author admits his own mea culpa,
Yep.
Latin, Latin for my guilt.
Yeah.
I recognize my own negligence in rare instances when, along with important thinkers, leaders, and institutions, I too may have been taken in by irrational conspiracy thought. I too have occasionally found myself entrapped in the mental straitjacket of a
Mm-hmm.
certain well known Cartesian saying, I think, therefore I am. But the kind of think referred to here is the old didactic, cognitive, analytical framing of an argument. If this, then that, about
Yeah.
real actions in the physical world of matter and material causality. Does that ring a bell, Jill?
Yeah. And by the way, we still have the lines open 631-307-4010. Feel free to call. Nope. I heard a click, but please feel free to call. Last week we had a good conversation. Was that? I think it was Justin. What's his name? He called in and he rattled away, and Peter, which was great 'cause I heard that the other day. But feel free to call in today. Grant would love to answer any questions and talk about anything on the plate. I want to ask you a little bit about Artemis and about this whole going back to space thing too a little bit later. But I don't want to digress and get off your topic until you are ready. But I'm just curious what you think about us
Well,
entering space again and all that fun stuff. So we'll add to that later.
well, we're getting to something I haven't really discussed on the it's vitally important. And it has to do with identity and mental health.
Okay.
The human sense of I am is rooted in what we call sentient feeling and not solely in the hard data of empirical observation and cognitive analysis. That said, what is called I am awareness cannot be sealed and bound to one's sense of what is real unless the cognitive, analytical, and the emotional, relational domains are integrated into one total brain
Mm-hmm.
experience. This is the basis of true education, allowing logical, rational, analytical, and sentient, creative, relative thought to flourish together through intimate interpersonal discourse. Something that hasn't happened a lot in the news media in the last several years. Logical, rational, didactic book reading and classroom lecturing are useful, but limited in value unless learners are also taught, at least metaphorically
Mm-hmm.
speaking, to
Hmm.
breathe in, smell,
Yeah.
taste, touch, hear, and visually conceptualize truth. And in that way, embrace, seal, and bind it into heart, mind, and one's whole being. Bad data, disinformation, may be called fake news, conspiracy thinking, gaslighting, and rumor mongering are the sure outcomes of consuming anything but verifiable truth. Instead, the pressures of fear, resentment, and other negative emotions lead to irrational, albeit appealing,
Yeah.
inner thoughts that win the reassuring approval of the crowd. This herd mentality. That is HERD, herd
Mm-hmm.
mentality. And since the late 1990s, research in the field of social psychology has given more than a hint of a strong link between individual paranoia and other pathological states of individuals in a group and group tendencies toward rumor mongering, soundbite labels, buzzwords, dog whistles, and conspiracy theories.
Mm-hmm. Lots of those.
The
Yep.
verb weaponize is a recently invented dog whistle for stigmatizing
I
something.
could
We've heard
imagine.
that a
Yep.
lot in the last few
Oh,
years.
yeah.
While more empirical research remains to be done, there's already a recognition that rumor spreading and conspiracy theories offer a physiological basis for artificial relief from temporary frustrations or from simply trying to cope with life's unrelenting pressures. While humor and conspiracy thinking may sadly offer quick or longer term relief from a range of pressures, they pose a high stakes
Yep.
risk of developing opioid like addictions with
Oh, wow.
serious consequences for personal and societal mental health. So, this goes to years of personal observation on my part. It has taken a lifetime of reasoning with careful observations and interpretations in my chemical research to see how something so seemingly divorced from atoms and molecules, electrons, bears so directly upon social systems in
Mm-hmm.
chaos. And I think that's going to be one of my important contributions as a scientist is pointing that out, that we need call upon our scientific understanding at the technical level to tackle our most intractable social problems. The chaos in both atomic and social systems is a vital prerequisite
Mm-hmm.
for change. No chaos, no change. This truth also bears upon how societal problems stand in the way of creating the just and peaceful society. But like my fellow thinkers in the academic ivory tower and journalistic worlds, I too have not always addressed
Mm-hmm.
or adequately communicated solutions to the great issues that threaten human survival. Because I have at times been unable to see, hear, smell, taste, or touch volumes of hard,
Yeah.
measurable evidences being addressed in my cognitive reasoning. When my emotional relational intelligence would not grasp, bind, seal, and
Mm-hmm.
identify my cognitive conclusions, I could not adequately communicate
Wow.
those conclusions.
Nope.
Now we're running into headlines like that all the time now. Uh, I love the CBS 60 Minutes
Oh
program
my
because
goodness, I love that. I used to work for
it
CBS. It was filmed in the next
it
studio.
deals. Well, Jill, did you see it last night?
No, I did not. Tell me what did I miss.
Yeah, was it great or was it great? Well, the first thing it tackled was something that they had actually broadcast back in 2008, and it had actually interviewed some of the same people that they met back in 2008 who were from the Tennessee part of the country, and they had little or no health insurance to deal with important
Mm,
issues with their bodies, especially with dental work and with vision. And so they interviewed people who recently, some were there in 2008, who had driven like hundreds of miles to Knoxville, Tennessee, to a free clinic
mm-hmm.
where they could be looked at by veteran professional medical people, healers. But since they had to drive through maybe from different states around Knoxville, Tennessee, just to be able to get in, to be looked at for that moment when these professionals were going to be there, they began driving in 3 days in advance just so they'd have a place in line that would get them in. Those people were interviewed, and it was heartrending, but it was such an opportunity to be hopeful of the near future because hundreds of those people got the help they needed with their teeth, their jaws, their bodies, their eyes there, by getting there in time. And some of the same people that were interviewed in 2008 were being interviewed there. That brought tears to my eyes to see that being made possible by volunteers, by people who were contributing out of their own small treasures, but not
Wow.
being dealt with yet by government. But I think it is soon to start to be. The other issue was called the ghost train, which I thought, once I heard what it was about, I thought was an unfair title. I thought was being a little bit polemical on the part of CBS, but what it was about was a vote. Maybe that was back in the 2000s of Californians to fund a new rapid transit system between Los Angeles and San Francisco that would take $33 billion to complete. However, it has not been completed, even though it's
Mm-hmm.
been started several years ago. And so that was one of the heart-rending things to see broadcast about. What it was about was this some of the bridges were put in for this rapid transit system, but it turned out they could only complete about 200 or, not that many, maybe 100, 150 miles of it in the San Joaquin Valley. And then different people were interviewed, candidates for office. But again, it degenerated, to my sadness, to not really addressing solutions, but addressing finger pointing. Did this? Who caused that? Who caused the underfunding? Who caused the waste and the fraud and the mismanagement in the state of California government? And that's, my friends, what we need to stay away from, because that's not a technical problem. That is a psychosocial problem. And it means we have to deal with it. We
Yeah.
can't just sit up and wag our heads at each other and shake our fingers at each other. We really have to start solving problems. That's one reason I wrote the book, the memoir, because it tells the reader how I came up with a solution to problems like that. And it's called the Venerable Matrix of a System, which in abbreviated as Venn matrix of the system that can be applied to any system, whether it's political, organizational, or technological, or a railroad construction, because it quantifies and specifies the topics that you need to cover to solve those kinds of social problems. What we call critical thinking, what in Judeo Christian religion we call the Talmud. So, with that, I'm going to see if I can get back in here. Um, I think I can.
Sure, sure, sure.
Okay. See if I can get back in there. Okay, there you are. I was kind of
It's okay.
out for a moment there. Um, I can't even think of what I wanted to talk about that was related to what we've been talking about. What came up for you? Did you have any questions or
Yeah, and
comments?
you could also share your screen at any time. I thought that's what you were about to share. If you want to show
Okay.
some of your memoirs, if you want to, yeah, show any of this, you're more than welcome to.
I've got to practice how to do that, but I
I can always help
I
you. If you
can.
send me something, I could always share the screen for you, whether it's your
Oh,
pictures, your words. I could teach
that's
you.
a
It's pretty easy. You just go to the bottom of the screen and you hit the word share, and I can help you. But yeah, so you can see some of
oh
the things you're
okay
talking about.
okay okay. We will do that
No
in
problem.
the very near future because
No.
part of it. Oh, I know what it was. It was a diagram of the Venn matrix.
Yes,
It's the
yes.
very thing. One of the young men who's running for the I think maybe a congressional seat
Okay.
in California. And he was so nice
Huh.
and critical of what happened. And he talked about fraud, waste, and mismanagement, which is an easy thing for a politician to talk about, but a much harder thing to say, okay, my fellow Californians, my fellow Americans, here is a diagram of the Venn matrix, which, if engaged with, will lead us in the exact right direction we need to complete this railroad system from LA to San Francisco in good time and even probably under budget.
Yeah.
Now, we've talked about that, not in depth, a few times, but it has five. Let's see, it has five components to it,
Wow.
and they're all well within the grasp of the mind of an 11-year-old or younger to be able to understand and carry out, because you can apply it to the family of an 11-year-old and say, okay, the family has these five vital functions that it must maintain. And they must be maintained by having a part of the organism to deal with those things. It's very simple. There has to be a management function,
Yeah.
and that management function handles what some politicians think they don't like, namely regulation. business regulation they hate.
Yeah.
But we've mentioned that, namely that when the human body doesn't have that regulation in the bloodstream and it gets too much sugar, glucose in there, it
Takes over. Yep.
overwhelms the insulin system and the person gets diabetes, gets sick, or dies. And
Mm-hmm.
so, diabetes, politically speaking, is one of the greatest social illnesses in the United States because they cannot manage and regulate systems. And that's why the train has not been finished. But the second piece of that, in order to achieve the goals, you have to have adequate resources,
Yeah.
including money.
Of
But you
course.
have to have equipment, you have to have buildings, you have to have people, you have to have materials, you have to have ideas, you have to have procedures, all of that. But the third one is you have to have hookups that connect everything together so that the people that can find you the resources are hooked up to the people who manage with those resources. And then the fourth one is the creative part. Who's doing the creative thinking? And that's what should have been discussed with the ghost train. What are the creative
Yeah.
ideas that politically will get the job done, which is what California did when it built the Golden Gate Bridge.
Oh, wow. What year was
Whenever
that,
there's
by the way? When was that built?
1937 is when it was completed. So what did that mean? It meant it wasn't until like about 1918
Mm-hmm.
that the financial
Yeah.
means, the structure had to be put together. It had to get buy-in
Yeah.
from every county up in the San Francisco Bay Area, especially Marin County and San Francisco County at the opposite ends of that bridge, because it was going to serve all of those people. They did it. Was it easy? No. Was it perfect? No. But the result was perfect. That bridge has been standing for what? Oh,
Wow.
uh,
I'm not good at
37,
math.
let's see,
I'm trying to do the
43,
math. Go ahead.
60 odd years.
Wow.
And, fortunately, there have been no storms off the Pacific that have knocked
Mm-hmm.
it down. But there's one last component of that Venn matrix formula, that design, and that's the middle piece. The center of it means what unifies that system together. And that is what needs to be put in place at the beginning. What are the values that unify us as a people of the state or the Bay Area or the United States? Without that, we can forget it.
Yeah.
There's no hope. But people, wiser heads, always manage to call the people, the citizens together. Roosevelt did that. Franklin, the other Roosevelt did it too. Theodore, when Theodore said, look, the big robber baron companies are eating our lunch in this country,
Yep.
and the poor people are getting poorer. And that's when unionization began.
Ah,
But there were other presidents that did great things. And we need always a great leader for the White House.
beautiful.
Well, where does that put us now,
It
Jill?
leaves us out of time. It is 3 p.m. Eastern Standard. So, what time is it near you? Is it 1 or is it 12? Wait, were we 3 hours difference?
We're 3 hours
Yeah.
different.
All right. Yeah, we're out of
And
time, darling. So, we have to kind of wrap up.
okay,
And
let me just say grantvenerablephd.com, all lowercase, is my website.
perfect. And to find the
My
memoirs, you can find
email
there.
is
Google your name.
ventwo@aol.com. And in the message box, put podcast question.
Perfect. Absolutely. And hopefully
Okay.
next week, don't forget, the lines will always be open. Give us a call, 631 307 4010, if you have any questions. And thanks so much again. You enjoy the rest of your night and day, I should say, okay?
Okay. You
Thank you for
also,
being our
Jill.
professional of the year. Always a pleasure having you here. Thank you.
Oh,
Bye
this is
bye.
goodbye.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.